Hey everybody, Stephen Green here, mortgage specialist, and we've got Sam Vakili joining us. He's an investment and retirement planner. So we are back with mortgages and markets, the week in review. So we've changed the format a little bit. We are no longer live. I believe Sam gets a little bit of stage fright, so we're not going to do that anymore. We're not live, but we're gonna post this through the Green Effect podcast. Okay, it's gonna be labeled the Green Effect, but shorts. We may or may not be stealing that from a major U.S. corporation, but I'm sure they'll be okay with it, right, Sam? It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Nobody's going to come in with a patent. Yeah. Nobody's coming in with that. We're fine.
I doubt it. So cool, man. All right, let's get right into it. So we're going to start with the mortgage update from the week. So listen, not a lot has happened. We're going to talk about some economical stuff, obviously, with you, Sam, a lot more, but not a whole ton has happened in mortgage world. Rates have pretty much stabilized, I think, for the last couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about some different indicators shortly on that. But things have really kind of stabilized on that regard. And I think what we're starting to see, to be totally honest, we are seeing lenders starting to ask a few more questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are into a new world here. They're asking, hey, are you guys still working? What kind of industry are you in? That sort of thing. So still business as usual from that regard, but there are questions being asked. We also noticed too, we're hearing a lot of noise from other lenders as well, some tightening of rules, stuff like that. So I think that, I'm sure, is not going to shock anybody. And listen, we're going to get into your piece shortly where, there's a ton of probably domino effect changes that are going to end up in mortgage world, but we're definitely, we're stabilizing on rates right now, and we're not seeing a whole ton of rule changes just yet. But listen, more to come, and that's why this is a weekly show, because man, this thing is changing and we're making it up as we go along. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw something earlier this week. I can't remember if it was JP Morgan or Bank of America, but they are starting to look at something similar on the mortgage side to say, well, maybe we're only going to lend up to a certain amount, down payments, will that change, et cetera. So this is, again, it's fluid, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's a tough call, because I think we all want to see people have that dream of owning a home. However, we also have to be very careful that we don't put people in a bad situation. If you think about it, if the bank does lend to you and you're not working, well, we don't want to have to take your house a few months later, right? So it is a fine line. We want people to be happy, that sort of thing. But in the same breath, we want to make sure that everyone can be taken care of and actually can be a dream, not a nightmare, right? So. All right, so I got a few questions for you, and I think I'm going to ask you some of these questions because as I've been talking to some of my partners and doing different things like this, I profess I don't have an economics degree. You know what I mean? I'm just I'm a mortgage guy. I'm a one-trick pony that knows a lot of stuff about mortgages. But the economic side, that's why you're here, and that's why we pay you the big bucks. So that note, let's just show. Actually, I want to start with this. So this is hot off the press, bud. Just this morning announced Canada and U.S., they've reached an agreement to extend border closure by 30 days. But what does this mean? Other than us not being able to go to the U.S. to have Olive Garden, what does this mean for us?
Of course you went to the Olive Garden. I mean, their chocolate mints are delicious, let's be honest. So
I ask for a cupful every time I'm there, and they're like, you must be Canadian. I'm like, fill up that cup, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. The reality is we're starting to see more areas, especially in the U.S., accepting the fact that we're probably going to be in a continued quarantine closure, whatever you want to call it, for another month as we try to flatten the curve. And I think I saw something earlier in the week about Trump saying he's hoping to reopen the borders, but the reality is you can't really do that right now. And that's the simple idea that we don't want people going in and out. We don't want a lot of activity and movement. So, the quick answer is it's going to probably mean what we already expected, which is that there's going to be a continued reduction of output and service and production and et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, they're still keeping it open for necessities and for I would assume transport trucks are still going to be allowed to go through, but the average person can't go down for a weekend in Michigan or wherever it is people go. So
I don't know if
that's
you want to go to Michigan right now with all the rioting that's going on down there anyway, but yeah.
exactly. So that's kind of, I would say that it's probably it was expected that this was eventually going to come out. And I think New York even just said yesterday or the day before that they're now going to be extending their quarantine for at least another 2 weeks. Now, on the flip side, you're starting to see in Europe the discussions of trying to lift certain restrictions. So hopefully they're going to be getting to that point maybe earlier than we are, the same way that we're seeing in other parts of Asia that they're already starting to lift those restrictions in China and whatnot. So that seems to be the direction. But for now, it probably makes sense to keep things closed since we were a little bit later on getting hit than Europe and the rest of Asia.
Well, and I'm just going to flip over to a different screen just to illustrate something real quick. So, I mean, listen, I got a lot of American friends and I quite enjoy going down there myself, but listen, it's a mess down there. Like it is a COVID-19 corona mess. And we're not talking about, spring break in Florida type corona mess. So I'm looking at this here and we got, look, Canada's flattening the corona curve. That's good news. I mean, are we at end of job? Heck no. But you know what? We're flattening it. So listen, if I'm, and no, by no means do I ever want this job, but listen, if I was ever prime minister, I'm thinking, you know what? Let's give our biggest trade partners down there, let's give them another month to get their, what together. Because if we're rocking it up here and we're flattening stuff, I'm not wanting to ruin this and, them unfortunately impact our economy worse and go from there, right? So
and it's not even just about us and the US. It's funny because there's starting to be the conversations of, well, what would happen if things start to flare up again? We have to be prepared for the ability to go into another quarantine if necessary once things open up, because we're only as strong as our weakest link. Right? We live in a globalized economy. There's so much movement. There's so much activity. Once you have people on airplanes again, it's very, very easy to get back to where we were a month ago. So, that's why I think you're seeing a lot of, I don't want to say pessimism, but just caution around how to open it, to do it slowly, to be able to track, to be able to test in ridiculous capacity so that if there is a flare up, we can at least try to shut it down a little cleaner than this time.
yeah, and listen, I mean, my wife listens to CNN and stuff. I mean, more for entertainment than anything. But I mean, you hear the president; he's arguing with the governors, and I'm in control, and you're not in control. And I'm like, man, do I want to be opening up my borders to that? I don't think so. Like, we'll wait. You guys get your whatever together down there, and you give us a call when you're done, right? So,
Right.
so another thing on that. So, we got nowhere to go. We got 65 cents a liter gas. And I'm getting a little bit frustrated because it's almost 80 cents a liter. All right. Like, I know we've been spoiled, but seriously, why is gas going up? There's no one's driving anywhere. Why are we racking up gas, man?
It's a little bit of a complex answer. I'd probably have to sit here for 45 minutes to try and begin to explain the whole ins and outs. You have to remember that the price of gas moves because of a lot of different factors. So I'll give you some examples. You have things like taxation. We were talking about the carbon tax a few months ago. You have things like where does the oil come from? So people probably don't necessarily realize this, but there's different types of oil across the world. So in Alberta, we have the oil sands, which, as you probably assume, it's sandy oil. It's not exactly the cleanest of oils. You have other parts of the world that also refine or extract oil, and they have what's called kind of cleaner or lighter, brighter oil. So our oil then has to be moved, thank you pipelines, to areas where they can refine it. And then it has to be moved back to the areas that we're selling it. So that goes into the cost of actually, what we experience at the pump. That's something else to just be mindful of. Then you have the question of seasonality. So you've probably seen, long weekends, prices always go up. And I don't know if I want to get into, too much of an expectation that happens every time, but generally speaking, in the spring, there is upward pressure on prices. So there's so many different pieces that go into this. Now, I know what most people are thinking is, okay, well, the cost of crude barrels have gone down because of what's going on with the OPEC and Russia, et cetera. And you think, okay, well, there's probably going to be a supply glut, which is true. So theoretically, based on those factors, everything should come down. But last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about mortgage rates, and how normally Bank of Canada cuts rates, mortgage rates go down. But again, there's more at play behind the scenes. That it's not very linear in that regard. So there's some other pieces that come in that still create upwards pressure. And so unfortunately, we're seeing the cost of oil or gas go up again.
Everything's just backwards, basically.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. All right, fair enough. I can't believe I'd ever be frustrated at 80 cents a liter, but seriously, man, that trip
Yeah.
that drive to the mailbox and back is killing me. So, all right, so let's just come back to housing here for a second. So, all right, so I'm sure this is not going to be a shocker for anybody, but as feared, okay, home resales plummeted across the board in March. So, listen, we know what's going to happen. I met with quite a few clients this week, well qualified, ready to buy. They don't want to right now. They're waiting to see what happens. Okay. We're expecting April for things to drop again. However, here's where the weird of weird goes on. Property values are generally holding up. Holy cow, how the heck does that happen? So when we're looking at this sort of thing, we got to remember, folks, we had a market with such a glutton of buyers and no inventory. Remember, if you watch me on social media, I post the inventory numbers very, very often. And we had a property in Kitchener, I don't know, about a month ago now, which seems like an eternity, but I think the asking price was $350. They had 51 offers and it went for 170 over asking. So yeah, prices are probably going to stay there for a while, but the issue becomes we've got all these buyers that still need to buy a house. So, if people are wondering why are prices of houses not dropping, that is the reason. We just got so many buyers. So, this is definitely going to be a weird one and a fun one to watch just to see what happens. I think we have people waiting. They're thinking, prices are going to drop, man. I'm going to get a deal in about a month. Well, maybe not, because there's just so many buyers and there's no inventory. So this is going to be this will be an interesting one to watch months of inventory, watch prices, and just see what happens. So could be an interesting show to watch. So all right, Sam, I got another one for you, so we're going to come back over here. So again, another shocker. Over year change in card spending. So people were spending their everything, and now all of a sudden we've got this drastic drop. So I don't know, but does this roll into my GDP question? So if we look at spending and I'm going to ask you a question: what is GDP and why do we care? So does this roll into that GDP answer?
Yeah, essentially. So GDP is your gross domestic output, essentially. So you have the idea here that all the different parts of the economy chug along, which is great. And at the end of the year, they will say, well, Canada's GDP is X, whatever it is, right? And the United States GDP is Y. And so, they use these figures to say, well, if these numbers are going up, that generally means that the country is producing more, it's spending more, it's consuming more, these numbers are going up. That's the general trajectory. Most countries expand and they grow, and that's why we talk about growth rates. And you'll hear about the IMF saying we expect that this is going to be the 2020 growth rate, the 2021. It's all the forecasting. That's essentially what most companies are trying to determine. So when you look at spending, it's doing exactly what we expected after, what was it, March 12th, March 16th, whatever day we kind of really started to feel that lockdown occur. And people are not going to go out and spend money. People are not going to go to restaurants. People are not going to be buying gifts. They're not going to be buying jewelry. They're not going to be buying general clothing or items in general, because there's now cash hoarding. The consumer sentiment has really shifted quite rapidly in that middle of March week, where we started to realize that things are getting real now, right? So because of that, you don't have, most likely, I should say, we won't have concerts, we won't have sporting events, we won't have as much travel. I was reading an interesting article to say that the longer that this plays out, the more comfortable we're going to have to become with the idea of video conferencing like we're doing right now. But then it goes as far as saying, well, will this reduce the amount of traveling that business people do? Because business travel is a big portion of that, of the airline and the hospitality market, to say, will they be going into the direction of just saying, hey, let's do this via video chat?
Yeah.
Right? Can we have these meetings that way?
Well, you and I have this right now. So, I mean, hey, listen, the company we work for, I think you're almost in the same boat if you're not there already. I legitimately, because of technology that's been rushed to market or rushed to the end user, I never have to see a customer ever again in person. I can do video, I can sign documents electronically, and I can validate them electronically. I can literally never leave my basement. So,
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. I'd say 99% of stuff. I wouldn't say everything has gone that direction, but they've now given us the ability to do some via web secure mail. So we're going in that direction, and I suspect as this continues, it's an inevitability.
yeah. Yeah, so it's going to be again another spending. We all know is down. Listen, I mean, my wife and I, we have two kids. I'm a director of a volleyball club. I've got a busy job. We ate out a lot. Well, guess what? We don't do it anymore. You know, I just spent $400 at a grocery store on half a cart of stuff, but we're not going out anymore. We're saving. I'm learning how to cook half decent food. It's going to be an interesting recovery.
That's
And by the
probably
way,
a
it's
good thing.
good. Yeah, it's good. By
Yes,
the way, not
yes,
half
yes.
decent. I'm just going to say it's freaking good. So
Yeah, and we're actually seeing now, you're starting to watch what's happening in countries like China that are a little bit ahead of us as far as the health side of things, to say now that they're beginning to reopen, are people going out and spending? And the answer is not quite as quick as maybe we had hoped, because yes, you're allowed to go out, but do people want to go out? Do people want to go back into the idea of we're spending everything? That there's almost a cloud that's looming over us. So
well, we
until
got to
that health
recover, right?
piece,
We got to recover
exactly,
from not having money for 2 months. So
not having money and kind of being worried about theoretically, will I get infected, right? That's still ultimately the underlying issue. Now, once a cure comes out, once a vaccine comes out, completely different conversation, right?
yeah.
Then you can really start to see unemployment heal. You can see corporations heal. You can see the consumer heal, and we'll hopefully get back to where we were. But the question is, how long will that take?
Yeah. And and so I read on someone's LinkedIn, it's one of three shapes is going to happen: the L shaped, which means it drops and it never comes back; a V shaped, where it drops and comes sharply back, like 2008; or the U shape, where it's a slow recovery. Right. So I think that's you got to kind of decide what letter you're going to look at and what's going to happen. I think it's gonna be more of a U myself, but who
Yeah,
knows, right?
it's that seems to be the buzzword now. I think I've probably seen it aside from the term now, the Great Lockdown, which is probably going to be coined in the coming days. It's everybody's talking about a U-shaped recovery, right? It's going to be a bit of a grind as we get through the trough, and then when things really start to get healthy again, which is probably attributed to the health side of things, then we can, fingers crossed, see an aggressive pump up on the end of the U.
Yeah. Okay, so just really quickly, GDP, if we hear it drops, good or bad?
Bad.
Okay, and if it increases, then it's good because that means we got more gross domestic output. So okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So this one, and listen, I like movies. I'm not a big reader. That's why you're gonna notice a lot of my websites here have pictures. I'm a big picture guy. And so I watch The Big Short. Sometimes when I work on mortgage applications, I watch the movie The Big Short, which is
Mhm.
the based on the 2008 housing crisis in the U.S. So when I hear on this article that the government of Canada or the Bank of Canada is jumping in and buying bonds, okay, so they're starting to buy different types of bonds and commercial paper and Canada mortgage bonds. This worries me, my friend, after I watched the movie. So, what do we have to be worried about here? Like, if they're jumping in and buying our bonds, which happen to hold mortgages, what do we got to worry about here?
Right. I don't know if I want to necessarily say we need to worry, but the idea here is that the Bank of Canada has certain levers they can pull, right? So these different forms of monetary policy come in different flavors. The one that we're most common or most familiar with is rate cuts and rate increases. So the Bank of Canada has cut rates by about 150 basis points, which is 1.5% over the last, let's say, month and a half or so. And theoretically, that should extend itself down into the consumer as far as lines of credits, mortgages, et cetera, lending in general. And so that's the traditional lever that we hear about. The other piece is quantitative easing, which came out of, which was relatively common coming out of the Great Recession, and you saw it over and over and over in Europe and across the world, really. So this is our version of that in this moment. And so the Bank of Canada is trying to create liquidity. They don't want, when you look at what happened in 08, 09, A lot of it was a Wall Street issue that trickled down into Main Street, and it was, the financial structure was the main underlying issue. And so they probably realized that they need to create liquidity in order to stop that type of problem from occurring again. Because if you have mass liquidations, if you have large credit needs, and you're starting to see that a lot of big corporations are raising money through bond issues, right? I think Carnival Cruises just did it a week ago for some hilarious number. And you're seeing it across the board. So a lot of companies are trying to issue these bonds to get money, but the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, all these different central banks are trying to take a bit of the pressure away from markets by saying, you know what, we're going to buy, or we're going to take on these debt instruments and put them on our balance sheet so that we don't have a problem down the road. That's the goal, right? The question will become is, and we'll find out in the years to come, is how does this impact the economy on a go forward basis? There's always a cause and effect. Every policy that comes in, two administrations later, or even sometimes one administration later, we end up realizing, okay, well, certain things were done under that administration that probably have an effect down the road. So I don't know if I'd go as far as saying worried, but that's the idea, is QE, quantitative easing, is occurring here.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, one other point here that I think I didn't mention, Bank of Canada met for their third, for their regularly quarterly meeting to decide on rates, and they didn't move it. I mean, after, 3 rate cuts in March, 2 of which were a surprise. Good God, there's not much more left to go until we get into negative rates. So I can't imagine we're going to see negative rates. I mean, I just don't think we're there yet. Maybe.
You never know. You never know, right? There are some countries that have done it. If you look at, I believe Japan has done it in the past. Again, you have to be mindful of the fact that the idea of negative rates is a very scary concept. The word negative rates really is like a buzzword. It gets people going. But you'd have to get into a very aggressive negative rate in order for it to affect the consumer, in the sense of, we're probably not going to be told, hey, if you take our money, we're going to pay you. Right? That's an aggressive form. But the Bank of Canada then talking to the big institutions, that's a whole different conversation. So never say never, right? We had the emergency cuts, which got us to where we are. So they're hoping that things stabilize and they don't need to do any further rate cuts, but we're pretty damn close.
Yeah. All right. So here's a question for you then. What do we need? What are we going to look at this week? What do you think is going to happen this week? What are we going to see?
Well, I think we're starting to see, even last night, the question about what kind of what kind of treatments could potentially come out. One of the big pharma companies, Gilead Sciences, came out saying yesterday that there is a possibility of one of their existing drugs to work as a treatment, which, if it ends up being the case, is monumental, because we don't want people to be in the ICU. We don't want severe cases, and it'll alleviate a lot of the pressure in the hospitals. So that's probably the big driver in the last couple hours that really pumped up markets this morning. We'll see how things close, but we've been on a rally. And I would say cautiously optimistic that it continues in some capacity. But if you look at what happened in 08, 09, there was about 8 rallies before it really hit its bottom and started to take off. So I caution clients, don't get caught up in the hype.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what I'm going to see. That's what I'm thinking we're going to see this week too. I think I think people are starting. I think it's a combination of, there's some optimism, but there's also some frustration. So we are seeing not rioting, but we're seeing what's the right word I'm looking for?
Protesting.
Thank you. Protesting in Michigan. I heard there's protesting going on in Vancouver. So I know this is starting to happen, and people are just getting frustrated. And I gotta say, you read so much stuff on social media every morning now. Because I'm originally from Toronto, I get the 680 news emails and I get the 570 news emails, and every morning I've got 3 emails. One is for Kitchener-Waterloo, the new deaths and the new occurrences, and I get one each from 570 and 680 for the Ontario ones. And the way they put it, well, 300 people have died or whatever it is. Well, only one since yesterday, which I know is a life. I get it. But it is only, God, I can't believe I'm saying it that way, but it's only one death. It's only an extra 5 people. It's only an extra 2. And if we're flattening the curve, can we not set the right context, right? So there is that
Yeah.
frustration. Do we get out there now, right? Do we get out there and, um, you know, maybe we have to start to get too exposed to this stuff so we can, because our immune systems are going to have issues. We're inside all this time. We're not immune to anything anymore, right? But so I think that's what we're going to see this coming week is that frustration is going to start to boil over a little bit. Vaccines are going to start to come out. I think we're slowly seeing people's thinking change a little bit, because this new normal is not cool. Like, this is not cool for anybody, right?
No,
And
it's
it's
probably
it's
not healthy.
no, and it's not going to stay this way. It's just not going to stay this way. So it'll be an interesting week from a market perspective, mortgages. It'll be interesting to see if we see more mortgage lenders change rules. How are we
Yes.
adapting to this? Rates, I don't think my humble opinion, I don't think rates are going anywhere for the next week. If they are, it might be a 5 basis point here or there, but I'm really thinking it's more going to be controlled by policy and lending rules. So
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, you have the teeter totter of, you have optimism on one side thinking things are getting slightly better, we're flattening the curve, we're on the right direction, there's potential treatments, we're seeing what's happening across the world with other countries that are ahead of us. So there's a little bit of optimism there. There's probably a little bit of frustration boiling, like you said, a little bit of we're eager to get back out there. People want to, it's funny, for the first time ever, I think people want to work, which is
yeah,
probably a bit of a, not exactly the most common thing. So, there's a little bit of optimism, but then we're starting to see, well, will we get economic information around unemployment like we got this year or this week, excuse me, that was slightly higher than expected? Will we see GDP numbers start to go down? Will we see, et cetera, et cetera? It's just a lot of these indicators come out after the fact. So we don't really know the information for April, which is probably the first real full month of quarantine, until it's into May.
yeah.
Right. So that's where there's going to be a lot of that give and take. So I think we got to strap in for the next little while at least.
Yeah, I think we had another month of this, another month of just
Yeah.
unknown. We'll say, if
Yeah.
that's the right way to put it, right? So
And then hopefully we can have the conversation on how do things reopen, and maybe we get lucky in this, before Canada Day. Who
yeah,
knows?
yeah. I think that would be. I would say by June 1st would be good.
June
So
1st, July 1st. June 1st would be magnificent.
yeah, that's the hope anyway. I've got to start to have some optimism, man, because honestly, it gets too much. Like, just hearing all the crap,
Exactly.
right? So, Sam, thanks a lot, buddy. Hey, listen, if anyone needs to get a hold of you, if you want to wrap off your phone number and email, and make sure you spell that last name, buddy.
Sure. Sam Vakili, Vakili, or sam.vakili at rbc.com, or 519-575-2218.
Beautiful. And for me, you can Google me. I'm also all sorts of weird places on the internet, whether I want it or not. So, all right, folks, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. And next week, we'll have this out again. Thanks so much.